She wedged two work rigs inside my garage without so much as a heads up, then slapped me with a $2,000 HOA complaint for supposed commercial activity. Shame she didn't realize I'd leased that garage to the county sheriff. At 6 a.m. on a Tuesday, I stepped outside to find a pair of hulking diesel trucks blocking my entire bay. Still warm, still stinking of exhaust, oil already bleeding into my concrete. The metallic tick of cooling engines blended with that sharp chemical bite of fresh motor oil burning my nose. Through her kitchen window, Lila Carver watched me with a coffee cup and the most satisfied smirk I'd ever seen, like she'd just checkmated me in a game I didn't know we were playing. What she didn't grasp was that Deputy Alvarez would be by in 2 hours to pick up tactical gear, and that HOA violation she'd already drafted was about to become evidence in her own harassment case. She had just declared war on someone who documents everything and rents space to law enforcement. What would you do if someone took over your garage, then tried to fine you for it? Drop your wildest neighbor story below. My name is Hank Mercer, and at 52, I've learned most problems have simple fixes. 28 years wrenching at the Ford dealership taught me patience, precision, and how to spot trouble before it wrecks your day. But nothing tuned me up for Lila. I inherited this corner lot ranch in Millfield, Texas when my wife Linda passed 3 years ago. Cancer took her fast and the medical bills took nearly everything else. Now it's just me, my German Shepherd Thor, and a property worth more than I can afford to keep. Salvation came from an unexpected lane. The county sheriff's office needed secure storage, and my detached 3-car garage was ideal. $400 a month doesn't sound like much, but when you're on disability and a thin pension, it's the line between keeping your house and joining foreclosure statistics. Deputy Alvarez has been renting space for 18 months now. Stores tactical gear, emergency supplies, evidence bags, shows up twice a week like clockwork, professional and respectful. The concrete still carries that honest motor oil scent from my mechanic days, now mixed with the metallic tang of police-grade equipment and the faint chemical whiff of evidence preservation materials. It's a clean arrangement that serves the community and keeps my lights on. Then Lila moved in next door. Picture someone who thinks owning a landscaping outfit makes her the neighborhood's self-appointed property manager. She arrived 6 months ago with her husband, Roy, an oil rig hand smart enough to travel for work 11 months out of the year. Within a week, she joined the HOA board and launched her campaign to enhance property values, which translates to make everyone miserable until they bend to my vision. She drives 2 massive trucks, a company rig stacked with commercial mowers and mulch spreaders, and a personal pickup that could haul a small building. Both are too big for her driveway, but instead of renting proper commercial storage, she decided my property looked handier. The warning signs started with her backyard blowout 2 months back. Full production, catered food, hired DJ, enough booze to float a riverboat. The bass pounded so hard it rattled my windows until midnight. Around noon, both her trucks appeared in my driveway like they'd lived there forever. I knocked politely. The smell of barbecue smoke mixed with diesel fumes was already triggering a headache. Lila, I need you to move your trucks. Deputy Alvarez has his scheduled check this afternoon. She barely glanced up from arranging her catered spread. It's just temporary overflow parking. It's my property, not a public lot. Her voice went arctic. Don't be so dramatic, Hank. One afternoon won't kill anyone. 6 hours. She left those trucks there 6 hours while her party raged. When Deputy Alvarez arrived for his equipment inspection, he had to park on the street and snake around her vehicles like they were fixtures. The gravel crunched under his boots as he took the long way around. Too professional to gripe, but clearly irritated. I apologized 3 times. Most humiliating moment of my retirement. That's when I realized this wasn't about convenience. It was about power. Lila was establishing that her needs outranked everyone else's, including county law enforcement. The harassment ramped up immediately. Next week, I caught her photographing my property with her phone, documenting every corner like a PI assembling a case. My garden, my fence, even Thor's doghouse got the surveillance treatment. Just updating neighborhood records for the HOA, she claimed with that same cool smile. Then came the violation notice printed on cheap copy paper that crackled like autumn leaves. Unapproved commercial activity detected. cease unauthorized business operations within 30 days, or face $2,000 fine. She was targeting my lifeline. Standing there with that notice in my hands, watching her smirk through her window, the strategy snapped into focus. This wasn't random neighbor drama. This was economic warfare. Lila had studied my situation, found my weak point, and launched a systematic campaign to crush my income and force a sale. Too bad she picked the wrong retired mechanic. Thor rumbled low, sensing the threat. Smart dog. He knew we were under attack before I did. 3 days after that humiliating barbecue episode, Lila fired her first official shot. A certified letter landed in my mailbox, one of those thick, legal-sized envelopes that scream expensive lawyer, and you're in trouble. The return address read Millfield Meadows Homeowners Association, but I could practically smell Lila's cheap perfume on the paperwork. The complaint accused me of running an unapproved commercial enterprise in violation of residential zoning. According to her carefully crafted fiction, my sheriff's lease constituted a business operation that threatened neighborhood character and property values. She demanded immediate termination of all commercial activity, plus a $2,000 fine for ongoing violations. Here's where her homework got sloppy. She'd scheduled an emergency HOA board meeting for Tuesday and somehow forgot to notify me until Monday afternoon. Classic ambush tactics. Catch the target unprepared and steamroll them into compliance. Too bad she picked the wrong guy to blindside. I spent Saturday morning at the county courthouse breathing that familiar smell of old paper and bureaucratic dust while digging through property records. The filing room felt like a library where excitement goes to die. But boring files can hide dynamite. "Well, I'll be," said Martha the clerk, adjusting her readers as she examined my original deed. "Your garage predates this HOA by 15 years, honey. That's what we call grandfathered use." Martha explained something I'd never considered. When you build before an HOA exists, those improvements are protected under what lawyers call grandfathered use clauses. Basically, your property rights can be older and stronger than their new rules. Linda would have loved this loophole. She always said the best defense was knowing more than your opponent. But the real bombshell came when I researched Lila's own situation. Municipal code clearly states commercial vehicles over 10,000 pounds require special permits for overnight residential parking. Both her landscaping trucks exceeded that weight, and she had exactly 0 permits on file. Tuesday evening, I walked into that community center meeting room armed with facts and feeling dangerous. The space reeked of burnt coffee and nervous sweat. 5 board members sat behind a folding table that looked borrowed from a church rummage sale, with Lila positioned dead center like a judge at sentencing. "Mr. Mercer," she began, consulting her notes with theatrical gravity, "your unauthorized commercial lease clearly violates Section 4.3 of our residential use covenant. We're prepared to impose immediate fines." "Hold on there, counselor," I said, sliding my courthouse research across that flimsy table. "My garage was built in 1987. Your HOA didn't exist until 2002. That's 15 years of grandfathered protection." The rustle of papers filled the sudden quiet. You could have heard a pin drop until George Whitaker, a retired postmaster who'd lived here since dirt was young, started chuckling like he'd heard the best joke of the year. "Hank's absolutely right," George announced, scanning my documents. "I remember when you put up that garage. My late wife, Ruby, brought you lemonade during construction." Lila's face went from pale to red to purple in 3 seconds. "That's completely irrelevant. Current zoning supersedes." "Speaking of current zoning," I said, savoring every word, "let's discuss Section 12.7 regarding commercial vehicle storage in residential areas." I produced photos of her trucks, complete with manufacturer weight specs and timestamp overnight parking evidence. "Both your vehicles exceed the 10,000 pound residential limit. You've been in violation for 6 months without permits." George actually slapped the table and burst out laughing. "Well, Lila, sounds like you better read those zoning laws yourself before tossing them at other folks. Looks like Hank just turned your own ammo against you." The room went dead still as everyone absorbed what had just happened. Lila had walked into her own trap using zoning to attack me while flouting those exact rules herself. Her face cycled through about 6 shades of embarrassment. "This is absolutely ridiculous," she exploded. her crafted authority collapsing like wet cardboard. I'm trying to protect our property values from his police compound. You mean the arrangement that brings county law enforcement through our neighborhood twice a week? Asked board member Denise Harper sweetly. The same one that probably lowered everyone's homeowner insurance rates. The meeting collapsed faster than a house of cards in a hurricane. Lila demanded real legal action and stormed out, abandoning her violation notice like hazardous waste. The remaining board voted 4-0 to toss all charges against me and issued Lila a formal citation for her commercial vehicle violations. Leaving the building, I could taste victory in the crisp evening air mixed with the lingering diesel haze from her illegally parked trucks. But through her kitchen window, I watched Lila pacing and gesturing into her phone, probably speed dialing every official she could think of. The next morning confirmed it. Her rigs were angled to obstruct my mailbox. Not technically unlawful, but aggravating enough to send a message. By noon, the city logged an anonymous complaint about excessive dog barking at my address. Thor hadn't barked excessively since puppyhood, but facts don't matter during a harassment campaign. Round one, Hank. But Lila was just getting warmed up. Her public embarrassment at the HOA meeting lasted exactly 48 hours before she took it to City Hall. The certified letter from Millfield City Planning landed Friday morning, stamped with enough seals to intimidate a federal judge. The complaint alleged that my sheriff's lease was creating an unauthorized quasi-commercial zone that violated residential character preservation codes, complete with color photos of Deputy Alvarez's patrol unit, equipment drop-offs, and even shots of me speaking with county personnel in my driveway. Someone had been busy with a long lens. The letter cited Municipal Code Section 8.4 about maintaining neighborhood character and demanded my appearance at a planning commission hearing in 2 weeks. But one detail grabbed me. The complaint was filed by concerned residents, yet processed by Aaron Harper from planning. That name rang a bell because Denise Harper on the HOA board had mentioned her daughter worked at City Hall. Small towns make everything family business, and apparently Aaron had inherited her mother's fairness along with her last name. I decided to talk to her before the hearing. The planning office smelled like industrial carpet and dim fluorescent lights, tucked in a basement designed by someone who hated windows. Aaron turned out to be a tired-looking 30-something who avoided eye contact like I carried the plague. She said she couldn't discuss active cases. Fair enough. So I asked about home business permits. I'd spent the prior evening drowning in municipal code until my eyes burned. Running a landscaping business from your residence requires specific permits, especially if you're storing work vehicles and meeting clients at home. Lila's business registration listed her house as the primary office, but she'd never filed a home occupation permit. The oversight was like leaving your front door wide open while warning others about theft. Hypothetically, I asked, what happens when someone operates commercially from residential property without proper permits? Erin scanned my printouts and I watched her professional composure buckle. She asked how much those trucks weighed. Over 12,000 pounds each, both commercial plates, both parked overnight without permits, I said. The irony was delicious. Lila was using residential character laws to come after me while breaking those exact provisions herself. There's more, I added, sliding over photos from her barbecue showing client consultations at her residence. Landscaping estimates, design meetings, payments, commercial activity, residential zone. Erin stared at the evidence like it might go off. She said this put her in a bind. I told her I wasn't asking for anything dishonest, only that the commission see the full picture before ruling on neighborhood character. 2 weeks later, the hearing room was packed shoulder to shoulder. Lila arrived with a briefcase and enough attitude to power a small city, clearly expecting another easy win. She'd brought her husband, Roy, though he looked like he'd rather be wrestling angry bears. Lila began with polished notes about how my commercial lease operation altered the neighborhood's character, citing photos and schedules with the confidence of a prosecutor delivering a slam dunk. Then it was my turn. Commissioners, I said, slowly for effect. Miss Carver is absolutely right about safeguarding residential character. That's why I was stunned to find her violating the same code she's waving around. I laid out my counter evidence methodically. Unpermitted home business operations, commercial vehicles exceeding residential weight limits, client meetings conducted at her address without zoning variances. Every violation she accused me of, She was committing. Worse. Best part, Erin had done her homework after our chat, and the commission had a full file of Lila's violations sitting on the table. Commission chair. Victor Lane cleared his throat like a man about to drop a hammer. Miss Carver, it appears you're operating without proper permits. Lila's practiced composure wilted. That's completely different, she sputtered. Actually, Lane continued, Mr. Mercer's arrangement appears properly documented and legally established, while your operations are not. The commission voted 5-0 to dismiss the complaint against me and issued violation notices to Lila for unpermitted commercial activity. Roy looked like he wanted to vanish under his chair. Walking out, I could smell vindication mixed with Lila's rising panic. But I knew it wasn't over. Public embarrassment twice in a month would drive someone like her toward reckless choices. The next morning brought fresh scratches on my mailbox and, by afternoon, an insurance claim notice fluttering in my driveway. According to Lila's painstaking complaint, Deputy Alvarez's cruiser had scraped her fence during a routine pickup, causing extensive damage and ongoing safety concerns. The estimate, $3,500 plus compensation for emotional distress. I examined the so-called damage. Thor trotted beside me, nose working overtime. The scratches looked fresh enough to reek of solvent. That sharp chemical tang burned the nostrils and screamed recent application. The lines were perfectly straight at bumper height, too uniform to be accidental. Either Alvarez had learned how to scrape wood through thin air, or someone got creative with spray paint and a putty knife. "Morning, Hank," called my neighbor Mildred from her garden, deadheading roses with surgical precision. At 78, she'd outlasted the subdivision's entire evolution, and her memory was sharper than her shears. She'd seen interesting activity at Lila's the prior evening. A can of something. Careful work on that fence. Funny thing, she added, the fence looked fine on her afternoon walk. Mildred's Ring doorbell was the neighborhood's stealth security network. I should check her clip around 6:30 p.m., she suggested, with the calm cunning of someone who knows evidence beats bluster. I phoned my insurer and got investigator Calvin Boyd, a man who'd handled more fraudulent claims than I'd rebuilt engines. He said they get about 6 fabricated damage claims a month, and most aren't staged well. What raised flags? Filing within 12 hours with pro-quality photos and a repair estimate from a contractor sharing her business address. Either amazing efficiency or premeditation. Calvin arrived next morning with gauges and a camera that could probably photograph fingerprints on raindrops. The fence told its own story under scrutiny. Scratches too uniform, too fresh, applied from the wrong angle to match vehicle impact. These were made by hand tools, likely a putty knife, he explained, pointing out differences in depth and direction. Real vehicle damage creates irregular patterns from momentum. This looked ruler straight. The Ring footage was the knockout punch Lila never saw coming. Mildred's camera captured her at 6:47 p.m., carefully applying gray spray paint in measured horizontal lines. The video was crisp enough to read the Rust-Oleum label, and the timestamp showed the damage occurred more than 12 hours after Alvarez's last visit. You could even hear Lila muttering as she worked, probably rehearsing her victim script. When Calvin confronted her with the evidence, the transformation was spectacular. Confident complainant to panicked defendant in seconds. He explained that insurance fraud is a felony with real penalties. The color drained from her face. She claimed it was all a misunderstanding, that she was touching up existing damage. The video showed her creating it, Calvin said evenly. Withdraw within 24 hours or face criminal charges with the county prosecutor. She pulled the claim before lunch, but her reputation tanked. In small towns, word moves faster than gossip, and by evening, everyone knew about the flop. That finally pushed Roy to the edge. That night, through their open kitchen window, I heard him tell her this had to stop. No prison over losing an argument. Their marriage was cracking under the stress of her obsession, and Roy was smart enough to plan his exit. But cornered people can be dangerous. Next morning brought anonymous calls to animal control about Thor's aggression, plus a mysterious health department inspection notice about unsanitary conditions. Lila was running out of official channels, which meant she'd likely get creative. Round 2, Hank, but I had a feeling the real war was just beginning. The county's property tax reassessment notice landed on a Tuesday that began ordinary and ended with my world turned sideways. Millfield County was conducting routine value updates bureaucratic code for "we need more money, and you're going to pay it." My modest ranch had apparently jumped 40% in value over 3 years, meaning my property taxes were about to double from manageable to catastrophic. The new figure came in around $6,000 annually. With just my disability pension and small Social Security checks, there was no way I could cover that increase without the sheriff's lease income. Even with that $400 a month, I'd be cutting it dangerously close. That's when the timing started to smell fishy. The reassessment came right after Lila's spectacular failures with the HOA and city planning. Normally, assessments happen county-wide, but this one singled out my property and 3 others on my street. All were long-time residents, all living on fixed incomes, all dealing with recent HOA complaints. The pattern was too neat to be coincidence. I drove down to the assessor's office the next morning, the building reeking of stale carpet and old paper. Janet, the clerk, pulled up my file with the weary precision of someone who'd answered this question 1,000 times. "Your assessment was flagged for review based on a complaint about unauthorized commercial improvements," she explained, highlighting sections of the report. Someone reported I'd converted residential space for business use without proper permits. The complaint was anonymous but suspiciously detailed, citing the sheriff's lease, equipment storage, and alleged property modifications that didn't exist. "Janet," I said, keeping my voice level though my pulse was pounding. "That garage was built in 1987. Nothing's been converted. It's the same structure that's always been there." She frowned at the screen. The complaint suggests recent improvements and increased property utilization. The assessor based the new valuation on those reported changes. The system was functioning exactly as designed. Anonymous complaints triggered reassessments, raising taxes, forcing people out. Elegant in its cruelty. Then Janet dropped a bomb. "You know," she said, "this complaint came through unusual channels. Most reassessment requests come from real estate agents or developers. This one came directly from a city planning office referral." City planning. Aaron Harper? The same Aaron who'd been feeling guilty about helping Lila with the zoning complaint. I drove straight to City Hall. Aaron was waiting with the look of someone carrying a heavy secret. "Mr. Mercer," she said before I could speak, "I need to tell you something about that reassessment." Brenda had been pressuring her to find creative solutions for problematic property owners, specifically mentioning elderly and disabled residents who couldn't fight back. The tax hike was meant to be the final blow, forcing me into financial crisis, making the sheriff's lease unsustainable, and setting the stage for property acquisition. "She's been asking about other residents too," Aaron admitted softly. "Mrs. Langley on Elm Street, the Ramirez family on Oak Avenue, all longtime homeowners, all hit with unexpected HOA issues lately." The pattern was clear now. Lila wasn't just targeting me. She was running a systematic campaign to drive out vulnerable residents and snatch up undervalued properties for her expanding landscaping business. But Aaron's guilt produced an unexpected gift. "I made copies of everything before I realized what was happening," she said, sliding a manila envelope across her desk. "Lila's requests, complaint details, even emails about neighborhood investment opportunities. I can't undo the reassessment right now," she added, "but this evidence might help you fight it." Walking back to my truck, the pieces locked into place like one of Linda's puzzles. This wasn't personal anymore. It was business. Lila had identified vulnerable homeowners, studied their finances, and built a strategy to force them out through harassment and bureaucratic manipulation. Too bad she underestimated the wrong guy. It was time to go on offense. That manila envelope felt like dynamite with a lit fuse, but dynamite only works if you know how to use it. I needed allies. Small towns run on networks of people who've been watching out for each other longer than Lila's been alive. My first stop was the Legal Aid Society in the courthouse basement, a cramped office that smelled like coffee and determination. Attorney Rosa Alvarez, Deputy Alvarez's sister, as it turned out, specialized in elder abuse and property rights. She reviewed Aaron's documents with surgical focus. "This is systematic harassment with clear financial motivation," she said, spreading the pages like a battle plan. We're not talking neighbor disputes. This is organized intimidation designed to force property sales. Rosa explained that harassment campaigns like this follow predictable patterns. Identify desirable properties owned by people with limited defenses, weaponize official channel to create financial pressure, then escalate until they sell cheap or lose their homes to tax liens. Your case is textbook predatory behavior, she said. But documentation this detailed? That's rare. Most victims don't even know what's happening until it's too late. She mapped out a legal strategy. Document everything. File harassment complaints with multiple agencies and prepare both civil and criminal charges. But more importantly, she urged expanding the coalition. Predators like her rarely stop at one victim, Rosa warned. If we identify her other targets, we can build a pattern too big for authorities to ignore. My next stop was Mildred's house, where afternoon tea looked more like a strategy meeting. 3 other longtime residents sat around her kitchen table, all facing HOA complaints or sudden city violations. Mrs. Langley on Elm Street had received noise complaints about her air conditioning unit. The Ramirez family on Oak Avenue was accused of storing unauthorized vehicles. George Whitaker had been cited for excessive lawn ornaments. His garden gnomes had been there 15 years. Lila's been busy, Mildred said dryly, topping off coffee with the efficiency of someone who'd been organizing neighbors since before HOAs existed. Every complaint in the last 6 months targeted people who'd lived here longer than her sidewalk. The pattern was undeniable. Systematic harassment designed to force out long-timers and create opportunities for acquisition. George had been digging too, pulling HOA board minutes dating back to Lila's arrival. She's asked detailed questions about property values, ownership duration, financial hardship cases, he said, adjusting his glasses. Even requested a list of residents over 65, claiming it was for community outreach. She'd been building target lists like a military operation. Mrs. Langley, a retired teacher with eagle eyes, had noticed even more. She's been photographing properties when owners aren't home, measuring driveways, even checking mailboxes for mortgage letters, she reported. The reconnaissance had been thorough, gathering intel for maximum impact. We decided to coordinate our response through what Mildred called enhanced neighborhood communication. Everyone would document future incidents with timestamps and photos. George would monitor HOA activities and flag upcoming complaints. Mrs. Langley would organize other targeted residents and share legal resources. I'd serve as liaison with law enforcement and legal aid. But our most powerful weapon was the broader community support we'd been building unknowingly. Local businesses, the hardware store, the diner, even the gas station had been watching Lila's escalation with concern. Small-town commerce depends on stable neighborhoods, and predatory harassment tanks property values. Tony from the hardware store said she'd been in last week asking about security cameras and motion sensors to monitor property boundary violations. Didn't feel right, he added. Told her we were out of stock. Maria, who owned the diner, had overheard Lila's lunch meetings with contractors and real estate agents. She's talking about development plans and neighborhood improvement schemes, Maria reported, even mentioning specific addresses and asking prices. By evening, we had what Rosa called the most comprehensive harassment dossier she'd ever seen: video evidence, witness statements, financial records, and proof of systematic targeting. Enough to file complaints with the county sheriff, the district attorney, the state real estate commission, and the federal housing authority. But documentation only matters if you know how to wield it. Rosa scheduled meetings with law enforcement the following week. I prepared for what would likely be Lila's most desperate moves yet. Cornered predators rarely surrender, they double down with dangerous behavior. Our coalition was ready. Time to see how far she'd go to protect her schemes. Lila's desperation started showing through increasingly sloppy attacks that revealed she was running out of both patience and intelligence. The morning after our coalition meeting, I found motor oil dumped across my driveway overnight, a slick mess that reeked like a garage fire and would cost hundreds to clean properly. The timing wasn't a coincidence. Deputy Alvarez was scheduled for his weekly equipment check that afternoon, and that oil slick would be both dangerous and humiliating. But Lila made a major tactical blunder. Motor oil doesn't vanish, and the trail of droplets led straight from my driveway to the storm drain, then continued in a suspicious line toward her property. Even worse for her, she'd used the same high-viscosity oil landscaping equipment requires the kind with distinctive additive signatures traceable in lab tests. I called Rosa, who arranged for environmental services to document and test the contamination. Illegal dumping of petroleum products is no small matter, especially when it threatens municipal water systems. The attacks escalated through the week, crude sabotage that would have been laughable if it weren't so malicious. Someone loosened the bolts on my mailbox post, leaving it wobbling dangerously close to the road. My garden hose was slashed in 3 spots, flooding the side yard and killing Linda's prized roses. Thor's water bowl was mysteriously filled with something that smelled like bleach, forcing an emergency vet visit that confirmed chemical poisoning attempts. Every incident was documented photos, timestamps, witness statements from neighbors now actively watching for suspicious activity. The pattern was clear. Lila was growing desperate and reckless. Instead of clever legal harassment, she'd resorted to amateur vandalism that left a trail Stevie Wonder could follow. Mildred's Ring camera captured shadowy figures sneaking through yards after midnight, always from Lila's direction. The footage wasn't sharp enough for positive ID, but the timing and movement patterns built a convincing circumstantial case. George uncovered something even more damaging while combing through HOA records. She's been using official board letterhead to file false complaints with multiple city departments, he revealed during one evening strategy session. Noise violations, health code breaches, even illegal dumping reports all aimed at the same longtime residents. That meant she was impersonating HOA business to weaponize city bureaucracy against her targets, a level of fraud that pushed this mess deep into criminal territory. Then came the breakthrough. Mrs. Langley's new motion-activated security cameras captured Lila in the act of tampering with property. After vandals hit her air conditioner, she'd installed them. The footage, dated and crystal clear, showed Lila attempting to disconnect the unit's electrical connections, clear criminal trespass and attempted property destruction. But Lila's worst mistake was interfering with emergency services. Thursday morning, a house fire broke out 3 blocks away. Mrs. Coleman's kitchen caught fire during breakfast, filling her home with smoke. When the fire department responded, they found their usual access blocked by construction barriers that hadn't been there the day before. The detour forced firefighters to drag hoses an extra 100 yards, delaying their response while an elderly woman's life hung in the balance. Fire Chief Victor Torres was livid. Someone deliberately obstructed emergency access during an active fire, he declared at an emergency city council meeting. This isn't vandalism, this is criminal endangerment. The barriers had been purchased from Lila's regular supplier and placed in locations specifically impeding emergency response in our neighborhood. That act pushed our situation from civil nuisance into the realm of a full-blown criminal investigation. Deputy Alvarez filed a formal report with the county prosecutor documenting the escalating harassment, property destruction, and now public safety interference. This has moved beyond a neighbor dispute, he said in his statement. We're looking at organized criminal activity designed to force property sales through intimidation and sabotage. Local journalist Hannah Kim started digging after Chief Torres' statement, and her first article, Systematic Harassment Campaign Targets Elderly Residents, exploded across the region. It prompted calls from other communities dealing with similar predatory schemes. The story was out, and Lila could no longer control the narrative. By Friday evening, her landscaping business was hemorrhaging clients. Roy's truck was conspicuously absent most nights, and neighbors reported hearing shouting matches about lawyers, divorce, and bankruptcy. The pressure was tearing her life apart just as she'd tried to tear ours apart. But cornered predators are most dangerous when they realize their schemes are collapsing. Saturday morning, an envelope appeared under my door containing photos of my daily routines, Thor's walking schedule, even shots taken through my kitchen window. The message was crystal clear. If legal harassment couldn't push me out, maybe personal intimidation would. It was time for the final confrontation. Our coalition had evidence, community support, and legal firepower. Sunday morning dawned eerily quiet, the kind of silence that makes you glance over your shoulder. I was refilling Thor's water bowl when Lila appeared at my back gate, dressed in what she probably considered her most trustworthy outfit. Pressed khakis and a polo shirt screaming reasonable person, reasonable offer. The transformation from harassing neighbor to concerned citizen would have fooled anyone who hadn't spent months documenting her behavior. "Hank," she called with sugar-coated sweetness that made my teeth ache. "Could I have a word? I think we need to clear the air about all these misunderstandings." She was holding a manila envelope thick enough to hold either legal documents or something more interesting. Given her history, I bet on the latter. I discreetly opened the voice recorder on my phone before unlatching the gate, a habit Rosa drilled into me once we started building the criminal case. "What can I do for you, Lila?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral as Thor planted himself between us, protective and alert. "Look, I know things got a little heated," she began, launching into a rehearsed speech. "But I've been thinking about how we can settle this without lawyers and courts and all that unpleasantness." She opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of cash thick enough to choke a horse. "I'm prepared to offer you $20,000 cash to voluntarily terminate your arrangement with the sheriff's department. Clean break. No hard feelings. Everybody wins." The smell of fresh bills mixed with desperation was almost overwhelming. 20,000 was more than I'd seen in one place since Linda's life insurance payout. And Lila knew exactly how tempting that was for someone facing rising property taxes and mounting legal costs. She'd done her homework. "That's very generous," I said carefully, letting her dig deeper. "But why would you want me to end a legal arrangement that benefits the community?" She leaned forward, intensity sharpening. "Between you and me, Hank, I've got big plans for this neighborhood. Development opportunities that could benefit everyone, but they require certain adjustments to the current situation." There it was, the admission Rosa had hoped for. Lila was confessing to a deliberate scheme to manipulate property values and drive out long-term residents for development. "What kind of development opportunities?" I asked, keeping her talking while the recorder captured every word. "Well, your corner lot has tremendous commercial potential," she said, warming to her pitch like a closer about to sign a deal. "Prime location, existing infrastructure, easy access for commercial vehicles. With the right improvements, it could be worth 3 times what you paid." She paused dramatically. "Of course, that would require removing certain complications that might interfere with proper development." The bribery attempt was textbook criminal behavior, but she wasn't done. "I should mention," she said, her voice hardening, "that if you're not interested in this generous settlement, things could get very difficult for you. I have connections at City Hall, County Planning, even the State Real Estate Commission. People who can make life very unpleasant for someone who refuses to be reasonable." That was no longer just bribery, that was extortion. "Are you threatening me, Lila?" I asked, giving her one last chance to back off. "I'm just explaining reality," she replied with cold confidence. "Small towns run on relationships and favors. People who cooperate with community improvement efforts tend to have fewer problems with permits, inspections, tax assessments. People who fight progress sometimes find bureaucracy challenging." The recording was gold-plated evidence attempted bribery, extortion, and abuse of public office connections, but Lila still wasn't done self-destructing. "Think carefully, Hank. $20,000 cash, no questions asked, clean break. Or keep fighting and watch your life get very complicated." She slid the envelope across my patio table like she was going all in. "I'll need an answer by tomorrow. After that, this generous offer expires, and we handle things the hard way." I looked at the money, then at Lila's expectant face, then at Thor, who growled low enough to rattle windows. "I'll definitely think about it," I said, technically true, since I'd be thinking about how to use this recording to put her behind bars. "Can I hold on to this overnight to consider my options?" Her smile was predatory. "Of course. Just remember, this is your chance to walk away with your dignity and your bank account intact." She turned to leave, then tossed one final grenade over her shoulder. "Oh, and Hank, I'd hate for anything unfortunate to happen to Thor while you're making your decision. Dogs can be so vulnerable to accidents when people aren't cooperative." That threat sealed her fate. Thor wasn't property. He was family, and threatening family meant Lila had just declared total war against someone with evidence, community backing, and legal firepower to destroy her completely. Tomorrow's town council meeting was going to be very interesting. The town council chambers had never seen a crowd like the one that packed in Tuesday evening. Every seat was taken, people lined the walls, and a crowd spilled into the hallway as if they were waiting for a championship game rather than a municipal meeting. Word had spread through Millfield faster than church gossip. The showdown between me and Lila was finally happening, and nobody wanted to miss the fireworks. I arrived early with a briefcase stuffed with evidence that felt heavier than any mechanic's toolbox I'd ever carried. Rosa sat beside me, radiating the quiet confidence of a lawyer who'd spent the weekend sharpening every legal blade. Behind us, our coalition gathered like a small army. Mildred with her tablet full of video footage, George with a stack of HOA records, Mrs. Langley with a teacher's precision for detail, and a dozen other neighbors who'd endured Lila's harassment. A Channel 7 news crew had set up cameras after Hannah Kim's newspaper expose went viral, bringing regional attention to what she dubbed the Millfield harassment scandal. Reporter Jennifer Walsh was there too, interviewing residents about the campaign targeting elderly homeowners. The story had momentum now, and everyone knew this meeting would decide whether justice would prevail or money would. Lila made her grand entrance fashionably late, accompanied by an expensive lawyer who probably billed more per hour than I made in a month. She was dressed for court conservative suit, minimal jewelry, hair pulled back in what image consultants call trustworthy professional, but her eyes burned with the desperation of someone whose empire was collapsing. Mayor Carmen Delgado called the meeting to order with the weight of someone who knew the night's decisions would define her administration. "We are here to address allegations of systematic harassment targeting longtime residents," she said, her voice cutting through the room. "This is serious business that affects our community's character and safety." Deputy Alvarez took the podium first, reading from an official report detailing months of escalating criminal activity. "We have documented evidence of property destruction, environmental violations, interference with emergency services, and attempted extortion," he stated with calm authority. "This investigation has revealed an organized campaign designed to force property sales through illegal intimidation." Then it was my turn. I rose slowly, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes, and pulled out my phone. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, "I'd like you to hear something recorded yesterday morning in my backyard." "Brenda's no." Lila's voice poured through the speakers, clear and damning, offering $20,000 to terminate my sheriff's lease, threatening bureaucratic retaliation, promising my life would become very difficult if I refused. The room went silent except for the hum of news cameras recording every incriminating word. You could hear people gasp as Lila bragged about her development schemes, her connections at City Hall, and her plan to make life miserable for uncooperative residents. But the loudest gasp came when her voice threatened Thor. "Dogs can be so vulnerable to accidents in neighborhoods where people aren't being cooperative." Lila's high-priced lawyer scribbled furiously, whispering frantic advice, but there was no spinning her own words. Fire Chief Torres took the podium next, his voice trembling with anger as he described the blocked emergency access during Mrs. Coleman's house fire. "Someone deliberately obstructed life-saving equipment during an active response," he said. "Mrs. Coleman could have died because of those barriers, and we have evidence linking their placement to this harassment campaign." Mayor Delgado then asked Lila if she wanted to respond. Her attorney advised silence, but her ego overrode caution. She stepped up to the microphone with the smug confidence of someone who still believed money and influence could bury the truth. "This is all a gross misunderstanding blown out of proportion by people who resist positive change," she began, her tone dripping with condescension. "I've been trying to enhance property values and improve our community through legitimate business development." That's when George Whitaker stood in the back row, his voice slicing through her performance. "Lila, we have your HOA meeting minutes, where you called longtime residents obstacles to progress and discussed accelerating turnover through strategic pressure. We've got your contractor receipts for those emergency barriers. We've got video of you vandalizing property and contaminating storm drains." His voice rose with righteous fury. "You tried to destroy our community for profit, and everybody here knows it." The room erupted in applause that thundered on for nearly 2 minutes. When Mayor Delgado restored order, she announced the city council had voted unanimously to cooperate fully with the county prosecutor's investigation. "This behavior has no place in Millfield," she declared. Our community protects its most vulnerable residents, not preys on them. County Prosecutor James Mitchell stepped forward with the gravitas of justice itself. "Miss Carver," he said, "you are under arrest for attempted extortion, environmental crimes, interference with emergency services, and conspiracy to commit fraud." As Deputy Alvarez read her rights, Lila's composure shattered completely. Her expensive lawyer was already whispering about plea deals as she was led out in handcuffs. The room erupted again, cheers, applause, cathartic shouts as justice rolled through the chamber. Roy sat in the back row, looking oddly relieved that his nightmare marriage was ending. Thor, waiting outside with Mildred, probably heard the cheering from the parking lot. 3 months later, Millfield felt like a different town. Or maybe it had simply returned to what it always was before Lila poisoned its spirit. The morning sun still streamed through my kitchen window the same way, casting long shadows over Linda's coffee mug that I still couldn't bring myself to put away. But now I could sip my coffee without glancing over my shoulder for hidden cameras or waiting for the next wave of harassment. Lila's criminal trial was mercifully swift. Faced with the mountain of evidence we'd gathered, she pled guilty to extortion, environmental crimes, and interference with emergency services in exchange for 18 months in county jail and 5 years of probation. Her landscaping business collapsed almost overnight, and Roy filed for divorce before sentencing. The house next door sold to a young teaching couple from Austin who baked cookies for the block and actually asked before borrowing my ladder. My county lease was expanded the day after Lila's arrest, boosting my monthly income to $1,000, enough to cover the higher property taxes and give me the financial stability I hadn't had since Linda passed. Deputy Alvarez now shares garage space with the fire department's emergency equipment and the county's new community outreach coordinator, turning my property into an unofficial safety hub that truly does raise property values. Ironic considering Lila's original complaint. The transformation rippled across Millfield in ways none of us expected. The sheriff's office presented Thor with an honorary K-9 certificate during a block party that drew half the town to my backyard, where the smell of grilling burgers mingled with diesel exhaust from the fire truck. Kids were climbing like a jungle gym. Watching my German Shepherd pose for photos wearing a bad-shaped tag was the highlight of my retirement. George Whitaker was elected HOA president in a landslide, running on transparency and community service instead of harassment and intimidation. His first act was to implement term limits and require recorded meetings, ensuring no future Lilas could weaponize neighborhood politics against vulnerable residents. The HOA budget now funds annual festivals and emergency preparedness programs instead of legal fees for frivolous complaints. Rosa Alvarez expanded her legal aid work to focus on elder harassment cases, using our documentation model as a blueprint for towns across Texas facing similar predators. She's already helped prosecute harassment campaigns in 6 other communities, turning our local victory into a statewide movement to protect vulnerable homeowners. But the most meaningful changes happened in smaller, quieter ways. Mildred's garden parties became weekly traditions where neighbors shared tools, resources, and friendship instead of gossip and suspicion. Mrs. Langley organized walking groups that were really just ways for retirees to check in on one another. The Ramirez family opened their garage for a neighborhood tool-sharing program, creating the kind of mutual support network that makes small towns feel like family. I even started the Linda Mercer Memorial Scholarship Fund, using part of my increased lease income, offering annual financial aid to local students pursuing careers in community service, teaching, nursing, social work, and law enforcement. The first recipient was Maria's daughter, heading to nursing school with dreams of serving rural communities, the kind Linda would have cherished. Watching those kids graduate each year, knowing they'll protect other communities, I can almost hear Linda's proud whisper in the evening breeze. 6 months after Lila's arrest, I was tending Linda's restored rose garden when laughter floated over the fence from next door. The new neighbor's twin daughters had discovered Thor's weakness for belly rubs and tennis balls, turning my vigilant guardian into the neighborhood's favorite babysitter. Their parents, both teachers drawn here by stories of our strong community, were already organizing parent-teacher meetings in their living room. Standing in my driveway that evening, watching those girls giggle as Thor patiently endured dress-up games, I realized something Linda would have known instinctively. Communities aren't destroyed by a single predator. They're strengthened when ordinary people decide that protecting one another matters more than avoiding conflict. The smell of barbecue drifted from multiple backyards, mixing with children's laughter and Thor's contented sighs. This was what home was supposed to sound, smell, and feel like. Your turn now. Share your HOA horror story or neighbor nightmare in the comments. You're not alone in these battles, and your community has more power than you think. Subscribe to HOA Stories for more tales of ordinary people standing their ground and watching karma catch up. And hit that notification bell because justice stories drop every day. Remember, sunlight is the best disinfectant for neighborhood bullies. From all of us here at HOA Stories, thanks for watching today's HOA Tyrant Meltdown. If you enjoyed watching neighbors fight back and justice prevail, smash that like button, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe so you don't miss the next HOA drama we bring you.